Redmont's first fortune was gold, flecks in the river gravel that drew the earliest travelers up the valley. It was never much, and it didn't last long. But the gold rush did something more lasting than fill anyone's pockets. It taught a generation of prospectors to look harder at the mountains around them. Up in the high country, those men found silver, and Esperanza was born. For a few short decades, it was the boldest gamble in the territory. A town built on deep shafts and borrowed money, riding a federal silver policy all the way to its peak. When that policy collapsed in 1893, so did Esperanza. Today there's little left up there but foundations and a few leaning structures, the mountain slowly taking back what was dug out of it. But not every mine in this valley was a gamble on a boom. Lower in the valley, near the town of Eagleton, a different kind of mining was just getting started. One built not on speculation, but on a fuel the whole country needed, year after year, regardless of policy or fashion.
Hello, and welcome back to Redmont. For this week's episode, I'm going to be finally tackling one missing industry here that was vitally important to this region, and that is the mining industry. And one of the reasons I've been leaving it so long is trying to do like mining industry right in City Skylines too. Well, it's a bit of a challenge because just like the farming industry, it's actually probably even worse for the mining industry. It's just kind of a bit of a mess how they do it in game, and to do it to make it look correct is a bit of a challenge. But first we're going to start here with go right back to the beginning. Obviously, Redmont started with a gold rush, but it'll be the silver mines at Esperanza where the mining industry really takes off for Redmont. First things first, we need a road to get there. I'm going to be going fairly high up into the mountains here. And one thing we have to keep in mind with this particular road, this road would have been established at a time when there wouldn't have been a lot of heavy machinery. So they're going to be at the mercy of the terrain. The road is definitely going to be winding through the terrain as it makes its way up the mountainside. I'm not going to be leveling terrain too much, and I'm not going to be cutting into the hillside. I also want this to feel very far away from anything else on the map. It's a bit of a optical illusion. Obviously, everything is much closer than it seems. The trick here is to try to use the terrain to create these little pockets or rooms that are isolated from one another so it feels larger than it actually is. The terrain for the location of the small town of Esperanza is really pretty steep, and I'm going to have to do a little bit of terraforming here to make it a little more acceptable to build on. Now, I do have a little confession here. The first thing I'm going to be building here isn't going to be a functioning mine. It's more of an excuse to build a ghost town, which are going to be, there should be quite a few of them dotting the landscape around Redmont. The real trick here is to find assets that would be acceptable for a ghost town at the beginning of the 20th century. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of options, but we do have these Australian assets from Tris. These are residential homes. I don't actually want these buildings to function as residential homes, so I'm going to be using StarQ's advanced building control here to turn these all into static assets. So they're just empty shells rather than functional buildings. And when we strip off all the props around the buildings, we can see that they actually are quite passable as small commercial buildings. What's really important here is the scale of the buildings. They're very small. Most of the assets in game are way too large for this. A turn of the century mining town, there's not going to be like massive large scale constructions. So these assets are just perfect in size. They might not be perfectly correct aesthetically, but they're close enough. I went ahead and placed a small group of them up on the hillside here. Another reason to use the static versions is they don't flatten out the terrain, and that allows me to place them on hillsides and slopes without too much trouble. As I was saying, I really need to be building a few more ghost towns around this whole entire region. A place like Redmont, they'd be scattered about all over the hillsides in all sorts of odd locations. And what I realized while trying to build this is there's still not a lot of assets in game where you can actually make this work. Of course, new assets are being added to the game all the time now, and perhaps I can come back and revisit ghost towns in the future. It certainly would be a lot of fun to build a proper one. For the site of the actual silver mine, this is a little more challenging. I really don't have any assets to build an abandoned mine. So I'm just going to work with the assets I have and perhaps revisit this in the future if new assets appear in the mod store that are more suitable. Of course, I'm going to be using some net lanes here to cover up the vanilla gravel road textures. It's probably one of the worst textures in the game. We're going to come back to roads a little later in the episode. I found a mod that is probably going to be quite interesting to a lot of people, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I don't want any actual functioning buildings up here. I want this to feel very remote, like you have to drive miles up into the mountainside to get to it. And any functioning buildings up here, the way the game mechanics work, it just generates way too much road traffic and it wouldn't look right. So I want this to look like that nobody comes up here, like it's kind of like a very remote location that very few people ever get to see. It's the detailing that's going to tie everything together and make this look like a little tiny abandoned town. One thing I've always found really annoying in the game was the tree aging mechanic, and I liked the tree controller mod before where you could just globally turn off tree growth, and I didn't have to think about it. Now I have to remember to set the little pause age button on every time I plant trees, which I forgot to do here. So all these trees are going to grow up in an age in an inappropriate way. I want these to be small, like desert kind of bushes. I don't want these to grow into full trees. Either I want like a more universal control over tree growth, or I want more tree options so I can plant the appropriate trees for what I'm trying to build. At the time of editing this video, the latest patch is just coming out in a couple days. I am a little concerned about it. I mean, I think it looks great. It's a huge improvement. There are a lot of things in it that I've been waiting for a very long time, but I am a little concerned about how my custom map is going to behave with the new map options, whether it's going to be like grandfathered in its current state, which would be just fine, or if the game is going to do some terrible thing to it and mangle it, or even worse yet, it just, once again, I have a whole bunch of problems getting into the game because of the patch. I'm mostly concerned that the patch is going to change the aesthetics of the map in ways that I didn't plan for or are unpredictable and might not look right. It might look good. It might do nothing at all to it because it's missing certain features that are required by the new maps in order to work. I won't know until the patch actually comes out. I'm really excited for the new surface painting tools. Those tools are going to make what I'm doing here much, much easier. I wanted some buildings that look much older, like makeshift shacks, just cobbled together by miners living, on the hillside. And we happen to have these assets that are designed to make slums and shanty towns. Once again, I don't want them to be functional, so I converted them into static assets here just so I get the shell of the building and place them where I want to along the hillside. These look really nice because they look like literally like somebody slapped together a shack to live in, like miners, very poor. They're not going to be living in nice fancy homes up here. There might be a few more established buildings for the strip, like saloons and banks and that sort of stuff. Everything else would have been built very quickly with materials found just laying around, whatever they could find. And after 100 years, obviously all this stuff is going to be just falling apart and returning to the earth. And of course, I need to make these buildings look really old and falling apart. And I'm going to use a few decals here to try to achieve this look. It looks fairly good. Of course, we have like windows and stuff. I can't do anything about them. The idea here is for this ghost town is it's not really meant to be, viewed close up. It's more for the flyovers, just so you see this little abandoned town up on the mountainside. I think for that it's going to look really, really good. But yeah, up close, there are a few issues. We'll just have to work with them for the time being. I really do like this view. It looks very remote. You can't see any other city or building off in the distance here, which is great. Along the road leading up to the ghost town, I added a few rural properties. Not too many. I don't really want a lot of activity up here, but it felt appropriate to add just a few things that look like something's being built up there. I also added this new back road here. I'm going to just keep an eye on it. I don't want a lot of traffic there, but it seemed appropriate that there'd be another road through there. Just outside of the town of Eagleton, I'm going to be building the next mining industry, and that's going to be a quarry. And we're just going to carve it into the hillside, like so. Most of these low hills here would be made up of gravel and sand, and this type of quarry isn't going to be anything really complicated or complex. It's just basically they're digging up the hillside. Now from town, I want to try to do something here where the city is kind of demanded that they don't dig out the entire hillside, because it just acts as a bit of a buffer, visual buffer between town and the quarry, and at the same time I do want it somewhat visible from town. It's not like a gravel quarry is going to be the biggest employer for the town, but industries like this leave a very massive footprint on the landscapes, and I do want it visible from the highway. I want this to be like a very noticeable feature as you drive through the city. With the functional mining industries, we have all the same sort of issues we have with the farming industry, is the random extractors that are built all over the place that make no sense. So I'm using the upgradable industry. It's the exact same sort of mod for the farms that allows me to hand place the actual extractors. What I definitely don't want to spawn here is that giant machine that digs up the hillside. Don't get me wrong, it's a really cool looking machine. It's just the scale of it just seems so inappropriate for most things I'm building. So I just don't want to see it at all. Another big issue for me is going to be the ground surface color that comes along with the mining industry. It certainly doesn't match the native ground color that would be here, which would be like sand colors, red oxides, yellow ochres, that sort of thing. So I have to figure out a way here to disguise this. I've already said this many times, but the vanilla industry is way too clean. Industries do not look like this, especially mining industries. They're incredibly messy. So we have to also figure out ways to disguise the asset so it looks more appropriate for the actual industry it represents. This also seemed like a really good location to place the cement factory. It kind of makes sense that it would be located right in the quarry. Of course, once again, we're dealing with assets here that have inappropriate props, like these bushes and stuff like this. I have to get rid of all this. It doesn't look right at all. I I want this to look more like the entire hillside is made up of gravel and sand rather than having this redstone cliff face texture here. So I'm going to just add a few surfaces here to try to disguise this a little bit. I'm also going to add a few prop buildings here as well, just to expand the footprint of the industry, make it look a little more substantial than what it looks like right now. And now I'm just going to add a few bushes to try to disguise some of the harder edges here with the surfaces. Okay, we're just going to take a moment here to take a look at the roads. I've had an opportunity to play around with the Texture Unifier mod, and I've replaced the road textures and the sidewalk textures with ones I've created myself. I have to say, this looks much better. These roads actually feel a lot more realistic than what was in the vanilla game. I'm surprised we've had to wait so long for this sort of functionality, considering how easy this actually is to do. It's just an image file, nothing else. So kind of a bit odd that we had to wait so long. I'm especially happy with the sidewalks here. We have a bit more variation in color. There's a few rust tones in here, which kind of indicates materials, like the gravel quarry we were just building. Those local materials would be used for things like concrete and cement. So it does make some sense that the sidewalks would have a tone that actually matches the landscape. So very happy for this. One small downside to this mod is it does replace all the paved surfaces, including the ones you've drawn in by hand. So we can see here where some of the detailing I've done, it is no longer looks right. I'll have to come back in and figure out a new detailing strategy for paved surfaces now. Okay, for our next industry, I'm going to need some real world examples to draw some inspiration from. So I'm using a coal mine that's located fairly close to the region, the actual geographical location of the map I created. This is actually in the same general area of Colorado. So I'm going to use this. The industry is obviously going to be coal. And like I was saying earlier, mining is an incredibly dirty industry, and the dirtiest of them all is going to be coal. So it's going to be a complete mess. What I'm looking at here is like the structures, trying to figure out what I could use in game to work as stand-ins, because we don't have any of these sorts of assets, or it's fairly limited. So I have to try to think of ideas that I could use in game to replicate this. It's not going to be 100% obviously, but I'm going to try to make it as close as possible. Also, just a general layout of the mine, like they're kind of sprawled out. This is an underground mine, which the game doesn't represent well at all. Like that random vanilla extractor thing is a huge problem for this, and I have to think of solutions and workarounds for all these problems. The location of this mine is going to be just east of Eagleton, and it's going to be the main industry that supports Eagleton. The trick here is to try to make it visually interesting, and I think a good way to do this is to put it up on a bit of an elevation above the highway, make it very visible from the road. And I also want it to be very visible from a bit of a distance as well. Like definitely from downtown Eagleton, I want you to be able to see the coal mine. Now this is where the mechanics for mines really kind of falls apart, because this is going to be underground, and to get the mine to work you have to draw out an extractor area, like a massive area, and it's going to cover the entire hillside with that gray surface that I would then have to try to disguise. So I'm going to be a bit more mindful about how I place out the surface here. Unfortunately, this won't make for a very large mine, because I can't draw it out. It only is going to extract from this area I'm drawing in right here, right? So it's not going to be a very productive mine. And that's kind of where the mechanics for mining kind of fall apart in game. They're only suitable for an open pit mine, really. That's not what I want to build here. I want to build something that's underground for the most part. Getting a road up to the top here was a bit of a challenge. I have to keep in mind that there are going to be quite a few large trucks driving along this road. So in this instance, the slope of the road is somewhat important. I finally installed the network tools mod here, and I'm going to use the slope control function here to level up the slope of the road a little bit. I think I get it down to around 5 to 4% or something like that. And I think that looks fairly reasonable. So I'll go with that. Okay, so now I'm going to go for the game, look for assets and props that match or close proximities to what I was seeing on Google Maps here. So obviously the mining shafts, I mean, those are fairly obvious and fairly easy to find in game. Also, we got to get rid of the gray surface. Once again, totally inappropriate for the region I'm working on. Now, I have to construct a conveyor belt. The conveyor belt is what moves the coal around from the mine site down to the railroad tracks. And I need support structures to hold up the conveyor belt. And that was a bit of a challenge. I was like trying to figure out something I could use for this. And I found the props, or the static versions of the oil pumps here. If I sink them into the ground, I just have the metal structure here, which I think works really well. Now there is a little bit of pumping animation in there. I'm just gonna have to live with that. But I think for what I'm trying to build here, I think this is a good substitute. I couldn't find anything in game for the conveyor belts, so I went on to the mod store and I found these assets by Harbor Master J, and I think they certainly look the part, so I'm going to go with these and use these. once again, I'm going to be using some building props here just to increase the size of the mine, make it look a little more substantial than what the game will actually just generate on its own. I'm also going to be using one of Tygon's specialized cargo hubs here. This one's for minerals and ore and that sort of stuff. And I'll connect that to our existing rail infrastructure. The real challenge with this mine is in the detailing, getting it to really look dirty, like a coal mine, like a proper coal mine. And I have to admit, I'm not sure if I really nailed it here. I might come back and revisit it, see if I can tweak it a bit, play with the surfaces a bit, try to make it look even dirtier than it actually is. But I think it's a good start here. One thing I did notice from Google Maps was the road network that snaked through the mine. So I'm trying to replicate that here. I'm going to start with an actual gravel road just to get an outline of where these roads might be. Trying to link up all the different shafts and structures that are on the mine site. Of course, I have no control over where the extractor vehicle is going to be driving. They're just going to go where they're going to go. There's nothing really I could do about that. I also noticed where the roads where all the vehicles would drive, they would be tracking coal dust all over the place. So I'm going to be using like one of these surface stains just to kind of draw over top of the gravel road here to kind of simulate that. Now I used the fill tool trying to make it go quicker, and obviously there's seams and lines there. I wish they would make the fill tool work a little better than it does. And here's where the challenge was, like trying to replicate this really dirty surface with the stain decals and stain surfaces. I think I did an okay job here. I think it could be probably a little better. I have to play around with this a little more and see what I can come up with. I'm now going to be expanding the conveyor belt network down to the rail line. I went and double checked this. I wasn't sure exactly how far these conveyor belts actually would run for, and it turns out in the real world they can run for several kilometers. So this is more than acceptable and probably something that actually would exist. I realized that the section over right directly above the highway, it probably wouldn't be open like the rest of it. It'd probably be enclosed simply to stop coal from falling off the conveyor belt and smashing into cars. So I had to find something to work for this. I'm going to be using this backup generator prop here, and I'm just going to draw it out with the line tool and then recolor it so it all matches. And I think this is pretty acceptable. I think this looks like the covers that I saw on Google Maps as well. Another thing I noticed was how the mine kind of sprawled out over a fairly substantial area. There were a lot of other structures, like would look like machine shops, probably offices, and other such buildings. So I'm going to spend a bit of time adding some of that. Problem with this whole build is there's not going to be a lot of people driving out this way, even with the mine. The mine only has like a workforce of something like 6 people. It's minuscule, so it's not going to have like a lot of people driving. And I want to have a bit more road traffic. So I'm actually going to use a bit of residential out here. I'm looking for something here. I found these assets, which I really like. These I think look kind of like bunkhouses for the miners to stay in if they're out here to work. Realistically, though, this probably wouldn't be here. We are a short drive from Eagleton, so workers can live in town. I'm just putting this here to simulate a bit more road traffic. I'm also going to be adding some offices, like functional offices, once again to attract some workers out here, just to get a little more road traffic along the highway. And a few more building props here just to simulate garages, machine shops, that sort of stuff. And of course, like usual, at some point during the build, I start to lose focus and my brain gets a little more scattered and I just start running off and doing all sorts of random detailing. going to add a few small ponds here to make the surrounding areas look a little more visually interesting. In the last update, they did a significant upgrade to the, like, if you might notice it on your own maps, when you're panning around, like the trees in the distance would flicker in and out. You probably noticed it in my cinematics quite a bit. It was very difficult to film and get that to look right without things flickering in and out of existence. In the last patch, they seem to have fixed most of that. Unfortunately, in this patch, what you'll notice with the water, it tends to want to pop in and out of view. I can't really control it. I don't know why that's happening, but it's just another small visual quirk that seems to be, as far as I could tell, that seems to be fairly recent. And once again, I'm going to be using trees to kind of hide the hard edge of the surfaces and decals here. I am looking forward to the new surface painting tools. I think maybe that will help minimize some of this. I am probably planting more trees than I was anticipating here, just to kind of like disguise edges and stuff. I also found this really cool little prop here. It's a water tank, and I'm pretty sure it's going to make another appearance in any future ghost towns I build. It's really kind of a neat old looking asset. And I'm going to finish up with a little bit of detailing around the cargo hub down here. That brings us to the end of this episode. If you stuck around to the very end, thank you so much. It really does help out with the YouTube algorithm. People who watch to the very end, that's a clear signal to the YouTube algorithm to show the video to more people. And of course, liking and subscribing doesn't hurt either. So the day after this video is released, there'll be the summer solstice update. I'll have to wait and see what that looks like, if it breaks my game again or if it's a smooth transition. I won't know until the update actually happens, so fingers crossed. It's probably going to be another couple weeks before the next episode. That should be, if think of the schedule, it should be Monte Palma again for those who are waiting for that, but it's going to be about 2 weeks. Anyway, I will see you all in the next episode. Everybody take care. Bye.